So give me a moment. And thanks for starting the recording, Maggie. Okay, hold on a second here now. Let me make sure I pull up the correct one. Oh, one moment, I apologize. This is the problem with using a split screen. All right.
You want me to share, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm trying to, sorry. This is the problem I have. So just so everybody knows, I have two computers up and running, so you may see me twice. But one has a camera on it and the other one does not. All right, I'm gonna try and put this in presentation mode and see how this works. So first I'm gonna share my screen. And while we're sitting here, if we could test the chat, because I understand the chat was not working well earlier this morning. So if we could test the chat, then just introduce yourselves. Our panelists and Carrie and I will introduce ourselves at the start here, but if you could say who you are, where you're from, and why you were interested in this session, that would be a great start. And I'm going to share this. All right, now you all should be seeing my screen with my not yet presented slide deck, but oh boy, I hope this doesn't. All right, now, hopefully you're seeing our welcome slide. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. One thing I will warn you guys about is because I am logged in twice, I'm actually, this is more for Carrie and Maggie. I will not see the chat easily as we're going through this. So just heads up on that. Okay. All right, so let's get started. So as you can see here, this is the overview of what we hope to accomplish. Obviously, we have a little bit less time than we originally planned, so our minutes don't add up in the breakout there, but we're going to do brief introductions of our panelists and us, and again, dive into theory of change and the risk program, et cetera. So Carrie, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone to our session. We're excited to talk with you today about involving K-12 students in local climate action and policy. I'm Carrie McDougall from NOAA's Office of Education, and Sarah, I think, have you introduced yourself officially?
Not really. I'm Carrie's colleague, so you'll be hearing more from me in just a moment.
And we together are the co-leads for NOAA's environmental literacy program. And so as you heard Sarah say during our probably 40 or 45-minute session now, today we will have, we'll do brief introductions followed by Sarah and I will provide a brief overview of our theory of change. And then we'll hear from panelists regarding effective strategies for engaging K-12 students and educators in climate action in their communities. Just a few logistical notes. As you heard, please introduce yourself in the chat, and it looks like the chat's working, so that's great. Also, the session is being recorded, and we understand that the recordings will be made available to you later. In the workshop agenda and program, you should see links to Padlet. And Maggie, if you could put the link to the Padlet in the chat, as well as our notes document, you can see where we will be taking notes, and you will ask that you contribute to the Padlet. You don't have to log in or anything. The Padlet has 2 questions posed in it now, and you can go ahead and begin to think about your answers and put them in at any point in time. Also, the one-pager that's associated with this session contains links to the programs you'll be hearing about later on today. And please use the chat to post comments, questions, whatever throughout the session today. We hope to have a good discussion. Sarah.
All right. Well, Carrie's, we've already introduced ourselves. So just to let you know who else will be participating from our group here today. First of all, if I could have Maggie come off mute and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Allen. I also work for NOAA's Office of Education. I'm an education and grant specialist, so I help out with this environmental literacy program. And yeah, I'll be taking notes today and helping moderate the chat. So.
Thanks, Maggie. And now to our presenters. So I'll just go through on the order in the slides. So starting with Emily.
Hello, everybody. Am I supposed to introduce myself? Oh,
Yes, please.
okay, sorry, everybody. Hi, I'm Emily Fano, the Senior Education Manager for the National Wildlife Federation in New York City and the PI for the Resilient Schools Consortium program. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Emily. And Brett?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Franco at Brooklyn College, currently serving as the director of the Science and Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, and I've been a partner with Emily on the Resilient Schools Consortium for a few years now.
Thank you. All right, moving on to Jen.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jen Kretzer. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center, a science museum in the Northern Adirondacks, and working with NOAA for the past almost over 4 years now on our youth leadership and community climate resilience work.
Thanks, Jen. And Joaquin?
Yes, good morning. My name is Joaquin Murrieta. I am the cultural ecologist at Watershed Management Group. Today, representing a wonderful team of Recharge the Rain, which is our office, as well as Arizona Project WET here in Tucson.
Thank you so much. All right. So let's get started. Sorry, I'm trying to control two different things. Just a little bit of background on why we were asked to facilitate this session, and then we'll dive into a brief intro of the theory of change. So we were asked to lead this session because engaging K-12 students in local climate action and policy is actually a major component of our theory of change. And in this panel, you're going to hear from these grantees who just introduced themselves, along with along with numerous others. Their work largely informed the theory of change, as well as some of the research literature. So our theory of change includes several causal pathways that connect the outcomes of our grantees' work to a much bigger goal, one that is bigger than any single program, organization, institution, and even federal agency or government can address on its own, and that's building communities' resilience to current and future impacts of climate change. So first, a little bit about the Environmental Literacy Program. The Environmental Literacy Program has actually been around since 2005. Carrie and I have been co-managing that program since that time. And it is a major competitive education grants program of NOAA. In 2015, we began focusing our solicitations on building community resilience through K-12 formal and informal education. And thus far, we've funded 30 projects totaling about $12.5 million. These grant competitions have been the most in demand than the previous 15 years of competitions that we've had, which has confirmed for us that there is a significant need for education in the area of helping community members beyond resilience professionals. But until recently, we had not articulated in detail why such investments were important. At first, we thought we needed a logic model for our program showing how the various projects fit together as a whole to achieve our stated goal, end goal of the program. But then we quickly realized that actually what we were needing was an articulation of the overarching philosophy for how our investments in community resilience education contribute to redressing massive social challenges that are brought about because of climate change. And so thus our theory of change was developed and published in 2020. On the slide, one other thing I want to mention before I go into the illustration. One important thing that writing this theory of change helped us do is make the case to municipal and state decision makers and other funders as to why investments in K-12 formal and informal education support their resilience building efforts. This illustration from our theory of change shows our vision of a resilient community, and it provides a snapshot of what we mean by community resilience education. You can see here in this illustration, major institutional players, the various audiences that we reach, and the key approaches that we have thus far identified as being effective in using education to build community resilience. And it also shows the emphasis on engaging audiences in solutions to climate change and taking action through active learning that allows participants to explore the issues and inherent trade-offs that potential solutions present. So now I'm going to turn things over to Carrie to dive in a little bit deeper into our theory of change. Carrie. Are you there?
Thanks, Sarah. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay. To develop the theory of change publication, we examined findings from our grantees, projects, and literature in relevant fields. Through that, we identified 5 concepts as critical to building community resilience through education. First of all, collective environmental literacy is essential. Earlier today, we heard John King state that addressing climate change requires collective action, and that is what we're calling for here. This means that not all individuals in a community must have the same level of environmental literacy, but rather there is a collectively held level of environmental literacy necessary to be resilient as a community. Secondly, cohesive social networks in a community build resilience. Social learning contributes to social cohesion because when individuals within a community learn from each other and together, social bonds within a community are strengthened and thus resilience is strengthened. And as we have heard echoed by many other speakers today, equity and inclusion must be central to community resilience education. As members of communities understand how human and natural systems interact, it is essential that they also understand how vulnerabilities to environmental hazards are disproportionately distributed, and approaches to reduce community vulnerability must also address existing inequities. Furthermore, policies are more robust when they reflect the values of society. For those values to manifest themselves, diverse community members need to contribute to policy deliberations and be civically engaged in creating healthier and stronger communities. However, many barriers exist, perceived and actual, to community members becoming civically active. Skills and confidence first need to be improved, and pathways for community members to take action on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation need to be explicit and accessible. Lastly, hope inspires actions. One of the conundrums of teaching and learning about climate change is that the more one comes to understand the magnitude of the impacts and the complexity of the problem, the more likely they are to feel hopeless and unmotivated to take action. For this reason, community resilience education needs to inspire hope by focusing on solutions and empowering community members, including children and youth, to be involved in developing and supporting the implementation of those solutions. You can learn more about these concepts and the outcomes that result from applying these concepts in our theory of change. In particular, the role of youth and or K-12 students and educators in creating community resilience is articulated. In the next 3 presentations, you'll hear from our grantees whose work informed and reflects many of the outcomes articulated throughout those causal pathways, such as youth can be effective apolitical champions of resilience and climate change in their communities. Youth must be trained to speak to, hear from, and be given specific opportunities to interface with local leaders and community elders. And youth can be agents of significant change in a community. We have seen some amazing successes in community resilience when youth have been put in the driver's seat. Now we'll turn things over to Emily Fano and Brett Branco to present about the RISK program.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to briefly give you an overview about the Resilient Schools Consortium. We're calling this slide 1.0 because the program has evolved over time. The program began as a partnership between Brooklyn College, the National Wildlife Federation, the Science Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, New York Sea Grant, the Mayor's Office of Resiliency, which was a key partner in New York City government, and 6 public schools in New York City that had been affected by Hurricane Sandy, which was an important component. Students learned about climate change science, resilience concepts, resilience design principles, and this program also provided funding to the schools to implement some small-scale resilience projects so that the students could get some hands-on opportunities. And it also provided an opportunity for youth voices to be heard by climate resilience practitioners and decision makers in New York City, which I'll talk about in a second. Next slide, please. One of the successes of the program was the development of a climate change resilience curriculum by two brilliant in-service middle school teachers, and having the teachers design the curriculum lent legitimacy and credibility to the curriculum. It could be used in both an in-school and after-school setting. It was aligned with the next generation science standards. And it included a vulnerability assessment that students could use to assess the vulnerability of their schools and the surrounding communities. And this curriculum, by the way, is available at risknyc.org. We encourage you to go and explore these curriculum materials. Next slide, please. So after doing their vulnerability assessments at their schools and in the surrounding communities, the students were engaged in an exercise to sort of reimagine and redesign the areas surrounding their schools to make them more resilient. So they were essentially following the steps to resilience that the professionals do. And they learned about green and gray infrastructure, and were using resilience guidelines that were developed by New York City as they were exploring changes to their school grounds. Next slide, please. One of the key goals of the program, like I said before, was to have students design, build, and install their own small-scale resilience project. We found that students were very highly motivated to get to hands-on projects very quickly. They were very action-oriented. So some schools, for example, here's pictures from Intermediate School 239. They were successful in building and installing a set of 3 hanging rain gardens that was motivated by by the flooding that they would see around their schools. But one of the barriers that we found was that many of the schools, as they moved from this assessment to design to then trying to implement projects, would run into sort of the bureaucratic red tape that made it difficult for them to achieve some of their visions. So that was one of the barriers that we encountered in our first attempts at risk, and what we call risk 1.0. And Emily's going to talk a little bit about how we adapted to that. But we found that the students were highly motivated for action at the beginning, but when they would run up against bureaucratic hurdles, that could sap some of their motivation. And so we had to figure out ways to get around that. The next slide, please.
Sorry, it's being difficult.
And another culminating project was using modeled after the city's resilience planning process, which was at the time 1NYC. The students developed a set of guidelines based around neighborhoods, buildings, infrastructure, and coastal defense, and then presented these to resilience professionals in city government and in the nonprofit sector, and had discussions and interactive feedback with them about these guidelines and how they could be implemented. And that was a very exciting opportunity that gave the students, it was a way to sort of make their voices heard in the resilience planning process. So that was very successful. But I just wanted to highlight again that that during some of those discussions, the realities of the bureaucratic process were articulated. So it's just something that was in the back of our mind that students are action oriented, but running into red tape can sap some of that energy. And so you have to think about that as you're planning these sort of action oriented student projects. And so now I think I'll turn it over to Emily to finish this off.
Thanks, Brett. So as we were kind of in between NOAA grant cycles, in 2019, we got a generous grant from FEMA, actually, and with important lessons learned from Risk 1.0 and feedback from teachers and students that they wanted more hands-on stuff, we kind of reoriented the program, and National Wildlife Federation launched this adapted program that, and curriculum also, that focused on coastal hazards, urban heat island, and climate justice. And students took boat trips in New York Harbor to learn about their coastal geography and their place as, you know, as an island. They learned, they planted trees on their school campuses. So all the schools got native trees to plant on their campuses for shade. And then our strategy this time was to work with partners like Trees New York and American Littoral Society and BioBoat that could kind of help to facilitate student action and give the students a sense of accomplishment. So the tree planting, for example, was determined at the very beginning of the school year. Communication with administrators and custodians happened really early on so that we knew that those projects were going to happen. And even though we did have to work with the DOE bureaucracy, the projects were well defined and happened much more smoothly. And of course, Brett remained a really key advisor of the program. So next slide, please. So at the annual risk summits, which happened for the Risk 1.0 program, students got the chance to showcase their work and communicate with resilience professionals, many of whom had been mentors to the students throughout the school year. And students brought their risk projects that they had done throughout the year, and they also shared the results of their vulnerability assessments and received feedback on the climate resiliency guidelines that Brett mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So in October 2019, we actually began to film a short documentary about the risk program when COVID hit in 2019. And our partners and we pivoted to provide a whole host of digital resources that are actually posted on the risk website. And with agreement from the teachers and the students, we actually decided to include the COVID pandemic in the documentary to show how resilient our teachers and students were throughout the pandemic. Emotionally resilient, you know, in the face of a devastating crisis. And so the film, which was produced by Huffman Studio, has been actually selected to be shown in 4 film festivals, both here and abroad. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. So thanks to a grant renewal from NOAA, which we're really thrilled about, in the fall of 2020, we're able to continue the risk program and for another 3 years, gratefully. And so the current iteration of the program was actually inspired by a student-generated idea to adopt a shoreline and to move beyond the school community and kind of into the community, the local shoreline community. And so for this phase of the program, National Wildlife Federation is partnering with teams of teachers and students from 8 New York City public schools in Coney Island. We have a community partner called the Coney Island Beautification Project. We are partnering with New York Sea Grant, American Littoral Society, and we have advisors from, of course, Brett is one of our advisors this year. We have also advisors from the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, because we're going to be dealing with climate grief or climate anxiety and trauma from COVID. And strategies to deal with that. And we also have Coney Island residents and students on our advisory board as well. And so beginning in the fall, students are going to adopt a shoreline in Coney Island, which is a frontline community in Brooklyn, which was really badly battered by Superstorm Sandy and is still threatened by sea level rise and coastal erosion and inequitable exposures to flooding. And basically through an adapted risk curriculum that is really going to center equity and justice, students are going to unpack really important and challenging topics like structural racism and inequality that have made communities like Coney Island more vulnerable to climate impacts than other communities. And through oral history interviews with local residents and the deployment of a coastal community vulnerability assessment that the students are going to design, they're going to learn about the lived experiences and concerns of Coney Islanders. And then, again, we'll also be dealing with the climate anxiety piece. Next slide. So basically, this is our last slide, but through field trips to local beaches, sorry, that's my dog barking, and community engagement events and dune plantings and public art installations, we're essentially going to be bringing, creating intergenerational alliances between students and local residents in Coney Island and community partners. And we're going to strive to build both social and ecological resilience together in the community. And I also wanted to mention that Knology will be providing formal evaluation for the project. So thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name is Jen Krutzer, and again, I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center, coming to you from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Haudenosaunee. Next slide. As I mentioned, I do work for a science center, and we are dedicated to igniting a connection between people and nature, where people and nature can thrive together and offer an example to the world. And we do this through a variety of education, programming, exhibitions, and outreach, as well as being a demonstration and education site for green building design, sustainability, and soon climate solutions. I want to just mention that in thinking about climate change education, the climate education landscape, the role of informal education institutions such as museums, zoos, and aquariums is really critical. We see over 850 million people a year visit informal education centers. And with this in mind, there's a critical role that museums, zoos, and aquariums, as well as many community-based organizations, play in operationalizing climate change education, public engagement, awareness, access to information, and outreach, and as well as providing important coordination and convening between NGOs, schools, and agencies and businesses that can provide a real lever for collective climate action and work towards that social cohesion and social impact that Sarah and Carrie mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk today about our program that we're very fortunate to be funded by NOAA through their environmental literacy program. And for the last 13 years, the Wild Center has convened, inspired, and empowered young people to learn, and teachers to learn about climate change, science, local impacts, and solutions through youth climate summits, youth leadership development, and workshops and retreats, teacher institutes, and community-based action projects that lead to that intergenerational dialogue, action, and meaningful change. So a youth climate summit, which again we've been doing, going now into our 14th year, is an in-person or now virtual event that convenes young people. Specifically, we work with high school students, but we've also had middle and college students participate to learn about climate change impacts and solutions. They participate in plenary sessions, active learning, through hands-on workshops, poster and networking sessions to connect them with other schools, organizations, agencies, community organizations, and to learn about careers across sectors. It's been a really powerful vehicle for learning and community engagement, as well as youth leadership development. And summits have been acting as a catalyst for youth to raise awareness about climate change and take action in their schools and communities. We work from a really core set of values that are focused on place-based education, youth-led and youth-driven, solutions-focused and action-oriented. They're centered in equity and empathy, and they work in partnership with hope, with a lot of hope and empowerment to help young people become agents of change and to work specifically in their communities. Next slide, please. A core element of our summits are our climate action plans and projects. And this is where we really see the work moving forward and evolving. If you could go back one slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. While program participants do show a 40% increase in their understanding of climate science and local impacts, it's the application of that knowledge that's really critical, that allows students to build those action competencies through active project-based learning in their schools and communities, and builds, again, that social cohesion and social impact. This model supports youth-led climate action and also critical leadership skills. So a climate action plan is a core element at the summits that is a collaborative effort where students come up with projects that they can implement in their schools and communities. These projects can be really anything. We've had all sorts of things like carbon neutral proms and solar bottle recharging, or solar powered recharging stations, and water bottle refilling stations. So it's really varies depending on the students, but we are seeing, particularly in our work with NOAA and our partnerships with the New York State Office of Climate Change and NYSERDA, as well as NOAA's Climate Program Office, to see how young people can intersect with state leaders and community leaders to embark on community climate resilience. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of our core values is our work as partnerships, and New York State Office of Climate Change has a program which helps young people work with local governments to take action on climate change through their Climate Smart Communities program. Through our Youth Climate Summits, we've had those connections and dialogue is created between those students, those community leaders, and the Office of Climate Change, and students are now actively engaged in communities across northern New York State and some of the rural areas where we work, where they are leading and participating in climate action and these climate smart communities task forces. For example, the slide you see now is in Homer, New York, where high school students actually lead and convene the climate smart communities task force, including scheduling meetings, doing the greenhouse gas inventory, running their social media campaigns, helping to decrease energy use across the community. Next slide, please. And they actually have done such a great job that both the communities of Saranac Lake and Homer, New York earned a bronze level certification for their climate smart community work for their communities. So I'll share some resources in the chat after I finish speaking, but these are really incredible. It's a really incredible impact to see how these young people are making a difference in their communities. And right now in our next phase of work, we actually have students creating a deliverable that will help be a guide essentially for students in schools on how they can intersect with this New York State program and how they can help build community climate resilience. The New York State Department of Conservation Office of Climate Change sees us now as a really essential partner for their work. So that's had a significant impact, which has been really exciting. We are also seeing a significant growth in our youth climate summits across New York State. Last year, we had 12 youth climate summits, and to date, we've worked with 47 different communities to help enact close to 90 summits globally. So we've seen a lot of work emerge out of our project, and we're really excited to keep that moving forward. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. So we can really see that there is a lot of success in the power of engaging and elevating youth voices, and that they can be really powerful, provide powerful examples of community climate resilience when you're working in partnership and thinking outside the box in terms of who you are actually working with within a community and how that can help create those relationships and work towards those tipping points. So we're really excited to continue to create dialogues and move forward. I'm going to stop talking because I want to make sure we have time for our last presenter, but I will say we also have a toolkit on how to plan youth summits and lots of resources on our site, which we'll share.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm going to quickly turn things over to Joaquin so he can share the Recharge the Rain project. And if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. And if we can't get to them today, we will kibitz with our presenters here and we will get back to you with them. So with that, Joaquin?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jen, and the previous presenters. I just want to show you what the previous presenters talk about, those wonderful words of networking, collaboration, hope, adaptation. How does it look on the ground? How does it look when the students, when the teachers, when the community get into action? The hands-on activities that NOAA funded through this environmental literacy program the last 4 years has been an amazing transformation for the community of Tucson, not only teachers, students, but the overall community when students and schools become community centers for climate adaptation. So it's been a beautiful journey to elevate the voice and actions of the students with the inspiration of the teachers as well. And that was the first thing we did. And we worked from elementary, middle school to high schools. So next slide, please, Sarah. So the impact of this project, we started working with 22 teachers at those 3 levels, and we make a call for interest. They wrote a letter to us, and based on that letter, why they want to be part of this climate adaptivity program. And so we got wonderful essays, and we accepted all the teachers. I mean, we got like 30 plus letters, wonderful opportunities. And then by self-selection, we stay with the core of teachers, which is around 22. We implemented 12 rain water harvesting centers at these schools done by students. Around 55,000 students participate on this. It was an amazing component. They invited community like partners, parents to implement these projects on their schools. The school became the lab for transformation, and the schools now are the community center for adaptation of climate change. So this is just some of the impacts we did through this process, through these 4 years. And before that, the partnership with Arizona Project WET and Watershed Management Group, we've been working with schools for quite some time, but in our own platforms. So putting us together, we are very practical as a nonprofit organization on community outreach and education, and Project WET is very practical at education. So we put those 2 experiences together, and with that, we created a curricula with teachers. So now it's established that. And so next slide, please. And so I'm going to show kind of the process on how we did it. This is the team that collaborated, Project WET, WNG, next slide. And empowering the teachers, providing them opportunities. And that was the excitement of this. It's just, what is the opportunity to elevate the empowerment of teachers to work with students and community? So we did several PD development for teachers. They got a stipend, and most of the teachers stay on this program. I mean, teachers, it's a huge turnover in their schools, but luckily they were able to stay with our program. Next. And then teachers, once they feel confident and empowered, they start sharing this with the students. It became a school wide effort sometimes. Sometimes some of the teachers try to elevate it at the district level. We're still working on that. But this is one of the high school teachers that is elevating, that is providing these tools for students in terms of schools get hot, get flooded, and they are ugly. So how do we transform this? And what is the role of students in transforming this? And what is the role of water harvesting, green infrastructure on the schools to transform the campuses of our students? Because they weren't happy coming to schools. That was one of the first questions I asked. Do you like coming to school? No. Why? Well, this place is really ugly. I mean, what is the motivation of coming to the school if the schools are ugly? Well, would you like to change that? Yes, I want to change that. Well, let's start working on that. So that was a great opportunity on taking advantage of the ugliness of schools to transform that. Next. And look at that. I mean, they are ugly. That is a middle school here in Tucson, typical. That's where the bus dropped the students. That's the everyday scene of a school here in the Sonoran Desert in Tucson, Arizona. Are you excited of coming to school? No, you're not. Well, how do we change that? And in addition to that, whenever it rains, over 10 to 12 inches that we get, water gets out of the roof and it's on the street immediately, flooding the city. Well, how do we transform that? Well, let's work on that. So next slide. So with the collaboration of teachers, students, they came up with these designs. There is a lot of calculations behind the area, the volume, the rain, how much water can we harvest, how much water that those trees are going to need. The little circles that you see, those are the trees. We know how much water each tree is going to get. So we calculate the basins for that. So the students are that. So that's their design. We just put it a little nicer. Next. And then we start working. The students invited parents, the students invited community, and they start transforming their own school. Yes, we come with a heavy machinery. I mean, it's the soil is hard. So we come with backhoes, with bobcats, and we excavate it. The students do the fun thing, the final shaping, the planting, the mulching, but it's a fun day. And then one of the lessons learned is just to finish the job in 4 hours. After the 5th hour, everybody's tired. So 4 hours, you finish, you look back, and boom, it's done. That's an amazing accomplishment on a weekend, and the students feel so empowered with that. So next slide. So that's how we finished the project that day. That's a 4-hour job. And next slide. And then that was in May. So this is the first monsoon. This is the first water harvesting thing. No longer water is on the street. It stays on the rain garden. That's how we call these things. All these plants are native of the Sonoran Desert. And they start growing because they have so much water, so many nutrients. The nutrients, we don't add anything to the soil. So the nutrients, it's just the water and the mulch and the soil that is there. So they start growing. This is the first monsoon, like in August. Next slide. This is how it looks last year. So in 3 years, these students transformed their school amazingly. Imagine how proud they are right now. Imagine how strong they feel when they walk back to their school, because these students graduated, and now the new students are monitoring this. We created these living labs for pollinators, for shade, for climate adaptation. We are measuring those things. And so it's amazing to continue working with the students. There is several setbacks with the district. We also needed to teach the district on doing all these things. But the district was telling us, or the principals, but the students don't know how to plant a tree. Well, that's why we are partnering with them. So we have several meetings with them, and they look at me, they look at us. So, oh, so you guys are the ones doing these things? Yeah, do you know how do you do this? Yeah, we know, we are professionals. We know what we're doing. So after we show things and different projects and curricula for us, who I am, those type of things, the district, the principal, start feeling more comfortable with that. But if it is just the student going and ask to do these type of projects, it becomes hard. But having the backup of somebody that knows how these things work, it is a great transformation. Next slide. So it is amazing the relation that this project created between teachers and students. Look at the faces of those two. The left is the student, the right is the teacher. It's just amazing what the human transformation of making things happen. Put them on the ground and learn how to use math. It was amazing to see that. Next. And then the confidence of the teachers on sharing this knowledge to the students. And some of these teachers are having family nights and they're sharing this to the community, which is amazing. Next slide. So at the end, I stay with these images. I stay with the images of community getting together in the classroom to transform their communities for climate adaptation. Police, people of color, Latinx, teachers, parents coming together to transform their city. It's been an amazing journey. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Joaquin and Jen, and Brett and Emily for sharing your lessons learned. We're going to be popped out in about a